The station was unusually quiet that morning, the kind of calm that settled in the bones. Coffee steamed beside the paperwork, radios hummed softly, and Officer Daniel Reeves sorted reports at his desk, thinking about nothing more than the day ahead. Across the room, his K9 partner Atlas lay near the door, chin on his paws, eyes half closed. It felt ordinary, comfortably, predictably ordinary. Then Atlas stood. Not abruptly, not with urgency, just enough to be noticed. His ears tilted forward. His tail didn't wag. He crossed the room slowly and placed something on Daniel's desk. A small bundle of flowers, their stems wrapped neatly with twine. Daniel blinked, confused, letting out a quiet laugh. "Where'd you get those, buddy?" Atlas didn't move. He didn't sit. He didn't relax. He whined once, low and tight, then blocked Daniel's chair with his body. When Daniel tried to push the flowers aside, Atlas nudged them back, nose trembling, eyes fixed, insistent, almost pleading. The room seemed to narrow. Daniel felt a strange prickle along his arms. Atlas had never done this. Not once in years of patrols, chases, and long nights. "Atlas," Daniel murmured, heart picking up pace. "What is it?" The dog's paw landed gently on the bundle, pressing it down. That's when Daniel noticed the folded paper tucked beneath the stems. His breath caught as he reached for it, because whatever Atlas had sensed, whatever had driven him to bring flowers into a police station, it was far from ordinary. Before we continue, remember to like, share, and subscribe for more heart-touching dog stories. And tell me, where are you watching from? Morning light slid through the tall station windows in pale, dusty bands. It was the kind of light that made everything feel slower than it really was. Officer Daniel Reeves sat at his desk with a lukewarm cup of coffee to his right and a thin stack of reports to his left. The printer hummed now and then. Radios murmured in low, familiar voices. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened, then closed. Nothing urgent. Nothing sharp. Just the steady rhythm of another weekday shift. Daniel rolled his shoulders once and exhaled. His uniform jacket rested on the back of his chair, sleeves creased just right, badge catching a soft glint whenever he moved. He'd been on duty long enough to know when a day was going to stay quiet. This felt like one of those days. Near the doorway, Atlas lay stretched out on the cool tile, paws crossed neatly in front of him. The German shepherd's chest rose and fell in an even rhythm. His ears were relaxed, angled slightly outward. One eye opened briefly when a passing officer's boots echoed a little too loud, then closed again. Daniel glanced over. There was comfort in that sight. Years earlier, he'd learned to read Atlas the way some people read weather. The smallest changes mattered. A tightened jaw, a shift of weight, a pause that lingered just a breath too long. Right now Atlas was calm. That meant everything else usually followed. Daniel took a sip of coffee and grimaced. "Should have dumped this an hour ago," he muttered. Atlas's tail gave a lazy thump against the floor. Not quite a response, but close enough. Daniel smiled without realizing it. They hadn't started the day together with sirens or calls, or the metallic edge of adrenaline. No overnight pursuit reports. No emergency briefings. Just paperwork, routine check-ins, and the faint smell of disinfectant mixed with old coffee. The station felt safe. Almost too safe. Daniel turned back to his screen, fingers moving through the muscle memory of reports he'd written 100 times before. Theft. Noise complaint. A minor traffic incident resolved without issue. Ordinary. That word followed him lately. Ordinary days had become something he noticed more now, something he respected. They weren't boring anymore. They were earned. Behind him, Atlas shifted. Daniel didn't look right away. The movement was subtle, the soft scrape of fur against tile. A breath drawn a little deeper than before. Then came the sound of pause. Slow. Measured. Daniel glanced over his shoulder. Atlas was standing. Not alert. Not tense. Just standing. His ears tilted forward slightly. His head angled as if listening to something no one else could hear. His tail stayed low still. Daniel watched him for a second longer than usual. "Everything good, buddy?" he asked quietly. Atlas didn't look at him. That was unusual. The dog took a few steps into the room. Not toward the door. Not toward another officer. Straight toward Daniel's desk. In his mouth he carried something unexpected. Daniel frowned. It took a moment for his brain to catch up. Flowers. A small bundle of them, simple fresh stems wrapped with twine. Pale petals brushed gently against Atlas's muzzle as he walked, careful not to crush them. Daniel stood halfway out of his chair. What? Atlas reached the desk and gently lifted his head. He set the flowers down. Right in the center. The room seemed to pause with them. Daniel stared. He let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. Okay, he said softly. That's new. A couple of officers nearby glanced over, curiosity flickering across their faces before they returned to their work. Daniel shook his head, smiling now. Where did you even find those? Atlas didn't sit. He didn't step back. He stayed exactly where he was. Standing close. Too close. Daniel reached for the flowers, intending to move them aside before they shed all over his paperwork. Atlas leaned forward. Just enough. A quiet whine slipped from his chest, low and tight, like a held breath finally escaping. Daniel froze. That sound wasn't playful. It wasn't impatient. It carried weight. Hey, Daniel murmured, his voice dropping without him meaning to. Easy. Atlas nudged the flowers back into place with his nose. His paw lifted and rested lightly on the desk's edge, not touching Daniel but close. Protective. Intent. Daniel felt a faint prickle move along his arms. This wasn't a trick. Atlas's eyes were steady, dark, searching Daniel's face, not asking for praise, not waiting for a command, waiting for understanding. Atlas, Daniel said again, slower now. What is it? The dog shifted his weight, blocking Daniel's chair just slightly, as if to keep him from standing too quickly. His ears angled back for a moment, then forward again. Listening. Daniel's smile faded. The station noise returned in pieces, radio's footsteps, a cough down the hall, but the space between him and Atlas felt sealed off. Daniel noticed something tucked beneath the stems. A corner of folded paper. His breath caught. He looked at Atlas. Atlas didn't move. Didn't blink. Daniel reached out, slowly, carefully, and slid the paper free. Atlas's pull remained on the desk. Steady. Grounding. Daniel unfolded the note. The paper was warm, and whatever message waited inside, Daniel already knew, deep in his chest, that Atlas hadn't brought flowers by accident. Not today. Not like this. Some instincts didn't announce themselves loudly. They arrived quietly. And once they did, nothing ever felt ordinary again. End of chapter 1. Daniel sat very still. The folded note rested between his fingers, unopened. Across the desk, Atlas stood like a statue carved out of patience. His breathing was slow, controlled. His ears stayed forward, tracking every sound in the room. Yet his eyes never left Daniel's face. Waiting. Daniel cleared his throat. Okay, he said quietly. I see you. Atlas's tail flicked once. Just once. Daniel unfolded the paper. The handwriting was neat but uneven, as if the writer had paused often. Pressed into the paper were faint impressions, words written slowly, deliberately. For the officer with the kind eyes and the dog who listens. Daniel swallowed. The station noise faded again, dulling at the edges. He leaned back slightly, careful not to brush Atlas's paw from the desk. The note continued. I don't know how else to say thank you. I don't even know if you'll remember me. Daniel's brow furrowed. But your dog remembered. A soft breath left him. His mind reached back automatically. Faces, calls, late nights, moments that blurred together over years. He couldn't place it yet. Not clearly. Atlas shifted. Not closer. Not farther. Just enough to remind Daniel he wasn't alone in this. The note ended there. No name. No date. Just a faint smudge near the corner, like a tear that had dried before it could fall. Daniel lowered the paper. That's it, he whispered. Atlas made a quiet sound in his throat, not a whine this time, more like a low hum. His nose dipped toward the flowers. Daniel looked down at them properly now. They weren't expensive. No florist's ribbon. Just wildflowers, yellow, white, a hint of purple. Picked carefully. Arranged with intention. Someone had taken time. Someone had thought about this. Did you bring these in from outside? Daniel asked. Atlas turned his head slightly toward the hallway. Then back to Daniel. A subtle cue. Daniel stood slowly, testing the moment. Atlas stepped back just enough to give him room, then repositioned himself at Daniel's side, shoulder aligned with Daniel's leg. Working posture. A few officers glanced over again. Everything okay? Sergeant Mills asked from across the room. Daniel nodded. Yeah, just K9 business. Mills smirked and went back to his screen. Daniel picked up the flowers, holding them carefully now, as if they might bruise if he squeezed too hard. All right, he murmured. Show me. Atlas moved. Not fast. Not pulling. He led Daniel toward the side entrance, the one that opened to the small parking lot and the strip of grass beyond. His pace was deliberate, checking back every few steps to make sure Daniel followed. Outside, the morning air was cool and clean. A breeze carried the smell of damp earth and nearby trees. Traffic passed distantly, muted. Atlas stopped near the edge of the grass. He lowered his head, sniffed, then lifted his gaze toward the street beyond the lot. Daniel followed his line of sight. Across the road sat a bus stop bench, empty except for a paper cup on the ground and a thin jacket folded neatly beside it. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. Atlas let out a soft huff. Concerned. Someone was here, Daniel said. Atlas's ears flicked forward. Yes. Daniel looked back at the flowers in his hands. The note. Your dog remembered. A memory surfaced, faint but insistent. A rainy evening. A call logged as wellness check. Someone sitting on a bench, shoulders hunched, staring at nothing. Atlas refusing to leave their side. Daniel's breath slowed. Hey, he said gently, crouching. Is that it? Atlas stepped closer, pressed his shoulder into Daniel's chest. Not demanding, reassuring. Daniel stood again, resolve settling quietly into place. All right, he said. Let's find them. Atlas's tail lifted, not wagging but ready. Whatever instinct had brought flowers into a police station wasn't finished yet. And this time, Daniel wasn't going to misread it. The street looked ordinary in daylight. Too ordinary. Cars passed in steady lines. A delivery truck hissed to a stop at the corner. Somewhere nearby, a lawn sprinkler clicked rhythmically, spraying water that glittered briefly before falling back to the ground. Daniel stood at the edge of the station parking lot, flowers still in his hand, scanning the bus stop across the road. Empty. Atlas sat beside him, posture straight, gaze fixed ahead. Waiting. Maybe they already left, Daniel said softly, more to steady himself than anything else. Atlas didn't react. No ear flick. No shift. Just that quiet, unwavering focus. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck and let out a slow breath. He didn't want to jump to conclusions. That habit, assuming the worst, had burned him before. Some days a note was just a note. Some days flowers were just flowers. Right? He glanced down at Atlas. You can't expect me to read minds, Daniel murmured. Atlas turned his head slightly and looked up at him. Not pleading. Not urgent. Just patient. Daniel straightened. All right, he said. Let's walk it. They crossed the street together when traffic broke, Daniel holding Atlas's lead loosely out of habit rather than need. Atlas walked at his side, shoulder even with Daniel's knee, movement smooth and unhurried. At the bus stop, Daniel crouched and picked up the paper cup. It was still damp inside. Recent. The folded jacket smelled faintly of soap, the cheap kind but clean. Someone had been trying. Daniel set the items back exactly as he found them. No one here now, he said, standing again. Could have just been a thank you. Atlas sniffed the bench carefully, then the ground beneath it. His nose paused at a spot near the curb. He sat. Daniel frowned. That's not a track, Daniel said. There's too much traffic. Atlas didn't argue. He simply stayed seated, waiting again. Daniel checked his watch. 10 minutes before his next scheduled check-in. He should head back inside. File the note away. Maybe ask around later. He took a step back toward the station. Atlas stayed where he was. Atlas, Daniel said gently. Come on. The dog looked at him, really looked, ears angling back slightly. His tail remained still. His posture stayed grounded, as if rooted to the pavement. Refusal. Daniel sighed. Buddy, he said, lowering his voice. I know you want to help, but we can't chase every feeling. Atlas stood. He moved forward 2 steps, then stopped. He looked back at Daniel and waited. Daniel felt the familiar tug, that quiet internal debate between procedure and instinct, between the clock and the unspoken. He hesitated, then shook his head. Not yet, he said. Atlas didn't whine, didn't pull. He simply sat again. Daniel turned toward the station. He made it 3 steps. Behind him, Atlas let out a sound Daniel had only heard a handful of times. Low, tight, almost restrained. Daniel stopped, closed his eyes. This wasn't disobedience. This was communication. Daniel turned back slowly. Atlas was standing now, body angled toward the sidewalk that led away from the bus stop, not toward the station. Away. Daniel followed the line. The sidewalk curved past a row of small shops, then disappeared between trees. Daniel's chest tightened. You think they went that way, he said. Atlas's ears flicked forward. Daniel looked at the note again. Your dog remembered. Memory sharpened. A woman on that bench months ago. Or was it a man? Someone fragile in the way people only get when they've run out of words. Atlas pressing his head gently into their side, refusing to leave until Daniel promised to check in the next day. Daniel exhaled. He clipped the lead more securely. Okay, he said. We'll look. Atlas stepped forward immediately. Not rushing, not pulling, just relieved. As they started down the sidewalk, Daniel realized something unsettling. Atlas hadn't been guessing. He'd been remembering. And Daniel had almost walked away from it. The sidewalk narrowed as they moved farther from the station. Trees leaned in from both sides, their leaves whispering softly in the breeze. Sunlight broke through in scattered patches, warming the concrete beneath their feet. Daniel walked slower now. Not because Atlas pulled, he didn't, but because something inside Daniel had shifted. The ordinary rhythm of the day was gone, replaced by a careful attention he usually reserved for night patrols and high-risk calls. Atlas stayed half a step ahead. His tail hung low, steady. His ears rotated constantly, catching distant sounds. A car door slamming, a voice somewhere behind a fence, the soft rustle of movement ahead. He checked back often, always making sure Daniel was still there. They passed a small playground, empty except for a swing swaying gently on its chain. The metallic creak echoed faintly. Atlas slowed, sniffed, then moved on. Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. A few minutes later, Atlas stopped abruptly. Not startled. Intentional. Daniel halted beside him. What is it? He whispered. Atlas lowered his head and sniffed the ground carefully. His breathing changed, shorter, more focused. His posture tightened just enough to signal importance. He took 3 steps forward. Stopped again. Whined softly. Daniel crouched. Easy, he murmured. I'm here. Atlas leaned into him briefly, then pulled his attention back toward a narrow path leading between 2 rows of trees. Daniel followed the line of sight. The path looked unused. Leaves scattered across it. No signs. No people. You sure? Daniel asked. Atlas's ears flicked forward. Yes. Daniel hesitated. Procedure whispered in his head. Call it in. Don't go alone. Stick to designated areas. But instinct answered back. Quietly. Firmly. He keyed his radio. Reeves, he said calmly. I'm stepping off route with K9. Wellness follow-up. I'll update. A pause. Copy that, dispatch replied. Daniel exhaled. Atlas moved immediately, leading the way down the path. His pace stayed measured, never frantic. He paused often, nose working the air rather than the ground now. Scent carried. The trees opened into a small clearing. Daniel stopped. At the center sat a park bench, old wood, paint peeling. A backpack rested beneath it. A pair of worn shoes sat neatly beside it. Too neatly. Atlas slowed. His body language changed. He didn't rush forward. He approached carefully, tail low, step soft. Daniel's pulse quickened. "Hello," he called gently. "Police department. Anyone here?" No answer. Atlas let out a low, concerned huff. He moved around the bench, then stopped. Daniel followed. Someone was sitting on the ground, back against the bench, knees pulled close. A jacket wrapped loosely around their shoulders. Their head was bowed, hair falling forward, hiding their face. They didn't look up. Atlas sat right in front of them, not touching, just present. The person's shoulders trembled. A breath broke, uneven, fragile. Daniel knelt slowly, keeping his movements small. "Hey," he said softly. "You're not in trouble." No response. Atlas inched closer, then stopped when the person lifted their head slightly. Eyes red. Exhausted. They looked at Atlas first. Their lips parted. "You remembered," they whispered. Atlas's ears softened. His tail gave a slow, careful wag. Daniel felt the weight of it settle fully now. The flowers. The note. The refusal to leave. Atlas hadn't been asking for permission. He'd been asking for time. Now, time mattered. The clearing felt smaller now. Not because the trees had moved, but because emotion had filled the space between them. Daniel stayed kneeling, one hand resting lightly on his thigh, the other open and visible. Atlas remained seated, posture calm, eyes soft but attentive. He angled his body just enough to offer comfort without pressure. The person on the ground swallowed hard. "I didn't think you'd actually come," they said quietly. Daniel nodded once. "We're here," he replied. "You did the right thing." A humorless breath escaped them. "I wasn't sure there was a right thing anymore." Atlas leaned forward. Slowly. He rested his chin on the person's knee. They stiffened, then relaxed. Their hand moved almost on its own, fingers curling into the thick fur at Atlas's neck. The touch was tentative at first, then grounding. Daniel watched closely. This was the moment he waited for. Connection. The person wiped at their eyes with the sleeve of their jacket. "I wrote the note this morning," they said. "I didn't know what else to do." Daniel reached into his pocket and unfolded the paper again. "For the officer with the kind eyes," he read softly. They nodded. "That was you. Last winter." Memory clicked fully into place. A freezing rain. A call logged late. A person sitting on a bench shaking, not from cold alone. Atlas pressing close, refusing to return to the cruiser until Daniel promised something he normally never did. "I said I'd check in," Daniel murmured. "You did," they replied. "Once. It mattered more than you know." Their voice cracked. "I tried to hold on to that." Atlas's ears flattened slightly, empathy written in every line of his body. The person took a shaky breath. "But this week, it got heavy again. Heavier than I could carry." Daniel didn't rush to fill the silence. He let it breathe. "That's when Atlas showed up," they continued. "I saw him outside the station earlier. He stopped, looked at me like he already knew." Atlas's tail gave a slow sweep against the ground. "I asked if you were working today," they whispered. "I didn't even know who I was asking." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "So the flowers. They weren't for you at first," the person said gently. "They were for him. For remembering me when I couldn't remember myself." Atlas lifted his head, met their eyes. Present. Daniel exhaled slowly. "And the note?" They looked down. "It was insurance," they said. "In case I couldn't ask for help out loud." The clearing went quiet. A bird chirped somewhere above them. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "I'm glad you did," he said. Because you don't have to do this alone. They nodded, tears slipping free now. Atlas shifted closer, his shoulder pressing gently against their leg, firm, reassuring. The message was clear. You're still here. And that was enough. For now. No sirens came. No rushing footsteps. Just breath. Slow, deliberate, shared. Daniel stayed where he was, keeping his voice low, steady, like an anchor dropped gently into water. Can I sit closer? He asked. The person nodded. Daniel shifted, settling on the ground beside them, close enough to be present but not overwhelming. Atlas adjusted instantly, repositioning so his body formed a quiet bridge between them. Warmth on one side, reassurance on the other. The person's shoulders trembled again. I didn't think anyone would notice, they whispered. Not anymore. Daniel shook his head. Atlas notices, he said simply. That's his job. Atlas's ears twitched at his name. His tail gave a small, careful sweep. Daniel spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. Tell me what today feels like, he said. Just today. The person swallowed. Heavy, they said after a moment. Like I'm carrying something that doesn't belong to me. Atlas pressed his shoulder more firmly against their leg. Grounding. Daniel nodded. That makes sense, he replied. Anyone would struggle under that kind of weight. Silence followed. Not empty. Working. The wind moved through the trees, leaves brushing together softly. Somewhere in the distance a child laughed, the sound drifting in and out like a reminder that life continued beyond this small clearing. Daniel keyed his radio again, keeping his tone calm. Dispatch, he said. I've made contact. Individual is safe. Requesting medical support. Non-emergency. Copy, came the reply. EMS en route. The person flinched slightly. They're not taking me away, are they? Daniel met their eyes. No, he said gently. They're just coming to help. Same as us. Atlas lifted his head and looked at them. Steady. Unafraid. They exhaled. Okay, they whispered. Minutes passed. Atlas stayed perfectly still, muscles relaxed but ready, eyes tracking subtle changes in breathing, posture, emotion. When the person's hand shook, he nudged it gently with his nose, just enough to remind them where they were. Here. Alive. Daniel spoke about small things. The weather. How the leaves were already starting to change. How Atlas had a habit of stealing socks and hiding them behind the couch. A faint smile appeared. The first. In a long while. When the distant sound of an ambulance finally reached them, Atlas's ears lifted, then settled. He didn't react. He trusted Daniel. EMS arrived quietly, movements calm, voices low. Daniel explained what he could, careful to preserve dignity, to protect the fragile trust built in these moments. Atlas stayed seated until one of the medics knelt and spoke softly to him. Good boy, she said. Atlas accepted the praise without shifting his focus. Only when the person stood supported steady did Atlas rise as well. They looked down at him. You saved me, they whispered. Atlas tilted his head, then leaned in, as if to say, you saved yourself. Daniel watched them walk toward the waiting ambulance, steps slow but purposeful. The flowers were still in his hand. He hadn't even noticed. Some rescues didn't end with handcuffs or headlines. Some ended quietly, with breath returning, with weight set down, with a dog who knew when to stay. The clearing emptied slowly. EMS doors closed with a soft final sound. Tires rolled away, crunching lightly over gravel before fading into the distance. Silence returned. Not the tense kind, the relieved kind. Daniel remained where he was for a moment longer, seated on the ground, elbows resting loosely on his knees. Atlas stood beside him, scanning the tree line once more before lowering himself with a quiet huff. Job finished. Daniel ran a hand along Atlas's back. Good work, he murmured. Atlas's tail tapped the ground once. That was enough. They walked back toward the station at an easy pace. No urgency now. The sidewalk seemed wider than before, the sunlight warmer, the air easier to breathe. Daniel noticed small things again. the smell of cut grass, the distant sound of a lawn mower, a pair of birds hopping along the curb. Atlas paused once, sniffed a patch of clover, then continued on without interest. Normal. Back at the station, the hum of routine resumed. Radios crackled. Keyboards clicked. Someone laughed quietly near the lockers. Sergeant Mills looked up as Daniel entered. "You good?" he asked. Daniel nodded. "Yeah," he said. "We are." Mills studied Atlas for a moment, then nodded once in return. "Figured." Daniel returned to his desk and set the flowers down carefully. He placed them in an empty evidence cup filled with water, arranging the stems so they wouldn't wilt too quickly. Atlas lay down nearby, head resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded. Peaceful. Later that afternoon, Daniel received a brief update. Stable. Receiving care. Daniel closed his eyes for a second longer than necessary. He exhaled. Atlas lifted his head and watched him. Daniel smiled faintly. "Looks like you were right," he said. Atlas's ears flicked, as if that had never been in doubt. The day wound down gently. Reports were finished. Coffee was replaced. The station lights shifted as evening approached, casting longer shadows across the floor. Before leaving, Daniel stopped at the desk once more. He touched the folded note, then tucked it safely into his pocket. Some things didn't belong in files. Outside, the sky softened into shades of gold and blue. Daniel clipped Atlas's lead and stepped into the fading light. "Dinner?" he asked. Atlas looked up, hopeful. Daniel laughed quietly. "Yeah," he said. "Dinner." As they walked to the cruiser, Daniel felt something settle inside him. A quiet certainty. Healing didn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it arrived on four legs. Evening settled gently over the city. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting warm pools of light onto quiet roads. Daniel drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting near Atlas's head in the passenger seat. The cruiser hummed softly beneath them. Atlas watched the passing world with calm interest. No tension. No scanning. Just presence. At home, the house greeted them with familiar stillness. Daniel set his keys down, unhooked Atlas's lead, and watched as the dog padded toward his water bowl, drank, then circled once before settling near the doorway. Always aware. Daniel removed his jacket and sat on the couch, the day catching up with him all at once. Not exhaustion. Reflection. He took the folded note from his pocket and read it again, slower this time. "Your dog remembered." Daniel leaned back and closed his eyes. There were dozens of faces he couldn't recall clearly anymore. Calls that blended together. Moments that ended when the shift did. But Atlas remembered. The pauses. The hesitation in a voice. The way someone stayed seated just a little too long. Daniel opened his eyes. Atlas was watching him. "You hear things I don't," Daniel said quietly. Atlas's tail moved once, agreeing, or maybe just listening. Later that week, Daniel returned to the station with a small glass vase. He placed the last surviving flower inside it and set it near the K9 unit board. No plaque, no explanation. Those who needed to understand did. A message arrived 2 days later. Short, simple, still here. "Thank you for seeing me." Daniel read it twice. Then once more. Atlas sat at his side, ears relaxed, eyes soft. Daniel reached down and rested his hand on Atlas's neck. "Good instincts," he murmured. Atlas leaned into the touch. Some bonds were built through years of training. Others through quiet moments no one else noticed. This one lived somewhere deeper. Beyond commands. Beyond words. Daniel understood something now, something he hadn't before. Listening wasn't just about sound. It was about presence. About noticing what didn't demand attention. Atlas lifted his head as someone walked past the office door, then relaxed again when the footsteps faded. Always aware. Always gentle. Daniel smiled. In a world that moved fast and loud, Atlas had brought flowers. And in doing so, he had reminded someone, including Daniel, that being seen could be enough to save a life. The station lights dimmed for the night. Daniel shut down his computer, clipped Atlas's lead and stood. "Ready?" he asked. Atlas rose. Together, they walked out into the quiet. Two steady shadows. Listening.